Hi, Luis. Glad to have you.
Well, Professor,
I'm gonna I'm gonna do my best, okay? I'm a little under the weather.
oh,
Uh
no worries, no worries.
so yeah, but I'm gonna still try my best to go over some of this with you, okay? So you doing okay? How many courses are you taking?
Uh, anatomy and then just this one, but anatomy takes up most of my time. So last night, I basically did the whole month of assignments that you posted already, and I took the test, but I actually had trouble taking that test because most of the information, I even tried to like go back and like Control F and like search certain
Right?
terms that were on the question, and I couldn't like really find it. So it was really like difficult for me.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's tough. I know I've had similar experiences years ago in the hard sciences. I already don't have that side of the brain. And then I would have find questions in different tasks, and I could have sworn that I'd never come across anything that prepared me for that task or question, and could not find the answer for it. Yeah, that's tough, but hang in there. Especially if you're doing that much work in a short period of time, you must have a decent command over it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. And that's great. So yeah, hang in there because I do not. I only have one side of the brain. If I couldn't teach history, I would be worthless at anything else.
I'm pretty sure that's not true.
No, it kind of
Uh,
is, but
uh,
thank you. Uh, so on this, right, we're looking at the Spanish colonizer, and this, I'm not really impressed with my thesis on this first one. It's just I'm thinking of Howard Zinn, and I'm thinking of other kind of Marxist and conflict historians that they make a just a broad categorical statement that that as if all of especially they're talking about Western Europe, right? Central and Western Europe was almost groomed to become the horrible colonizers that they became over the Americas. And so you look at, oh goodness, you look at especially the changing of the economic system from feudalism to mercantilism and then to capitalism. You look at the Germanic and Roman leaders and instances in which that they ruled uh, somewhat tyrannically, etc. At any rate, they put them all together and say, all right, yeah, the Spanish, whether it's Spanish, French, English, right? Of course, they have national differences, but overall, they're just Western European imperialists. And so, in light of that narrative, I wanted to show, just give a window peek into just how diverse Spanish history has been. I mean, my goodness, the Minoans and then the Mycenaeans among the Greek, the Lebanese or the Phoenicians amongst the Near Eastern, the Near Eastern with North African Berber people, as well as with Arabic people, the Carthaginians, and then the collectively the Moors. And you have the who else? The what else am I forgetting? The Germanic Visigoths came in and took it over. Of course, you had the Romans for actually about 5 centuries. You had well, the Danish and others not so much as they did in England. But at any rate, just you're talking about a melting pot in this land known as Iberia or Hispania or Spain. And so I just wanted to kind of just convey that in this one. It's more informative than it is argumentative. Uh, but just that's not fair to have like a monolithic view of just Western European imperialists. Uh, and also to just assume that they were groomed to become colonizers. I don't see that neat pattern, right? And people like to go back and select the data that they choose to try to convince people that there is such a pattern. So at any rate, and speaking of pattern, what was really interesting to me, this is a little off topic, and I apologize, but there is it's called a Sonderweg, and it is the special path of Germany. How it is supposedly had a special path to the Third Reich of Nazi Germany. So, of course, the characteristics, you think about the characteristics of Nazi Germany, and you try to find those characteristics, much less try to find a pattern of them in German history. So, like blind obedience to authority, anti-Semitism, militarism, etc. Right? And it's fun. It's a fun game to play, but oftentimes it's just a matter of as they say, like semantics. You're just you're making up patterns, and if you cherry pick your facts well enough, you can make out a pattern that is two patterns that are completely, opposed to each other. So at any rate, then with number two, right, the two ironies of Spanish colonization, that'll be very upfront for you, especially you dealing with the hard sciences and what you're doing right now with anatomy. This should be a piece of cake. And so it's that one is the accoutrements of civilization that the Spanish boasted of over the Native Americans as part of their justification for colonizing them. They didn't come up with it themselves. They piggybacked off of other people. So I start with a farming revolution and give credit to the Celtic people instead of the native Iberians. And then, of course, commercial, what do they call it? Specie, like what they use, coins in a commercial economy. Arguably the Greeks as well as the Phoenicians. Alphabet and writing, the Phoenicians. The development of complex society, the Romans, architecture and great, architectural feats for certain, the Romans, city layout, municipal layout when it comes down to the grid of streets, to municipal law, etc. And also going all the way to national law, right? With the known as the 12 tables, the Lex Hortensia of Rome, Spain got from Rome. Okay. And so Spain is kind of especially Roman influenced. And that was largely evidently due to the fact that the Visigoths, who took over when Rome fell, were quite impressed with Roman civilization, and they maintained quite a bit of it. Their constitution and their law, their legal code. It was mainly that, but also their language. They softened the Germanic tongue up with Latin, right, to make the Romantic tongue of Castilian or Spanish. So at any rate, especially with the legal part, Spain is very Rome influenced. Let's see here. And then, of course, you had the let's see here, the Moors, right? And with the Moors, I think of the Renaissance that they had. So uh, they had Ibn al-Rahmad III and others who allowed Spanish Catholics to come up and do different types of artistic and musical and intellectual feats that impressed him. And it was supposedly quite a renaissance from Cordoba, Spain. And so, all of that, right? They're getting from other people. The rule of judges and so forth, that came from the Moors. And then secondly, right, is the other irony is that the Spanish utilized a lot of the same exploitative practices on the Native Americans that had once been used against them historically prior. So the Romans is about 250 BC. They had the latifundia system, and pretty much the exact same thing was found in the encomienda system, right? Whereby you are entitled to the land and to the forced labor of those that you conquer. Okay, so they carried that tradition with them, but they were on the other side of the power dynamic, obviously, on the dominating side. So you had the encomienda, and then the Romans had something close to the repartimiento, and that was the public works program, right? Where the ruling power would determine how many men he needed from the subjugated people to build a road, a church, a bridge, put down a rebellion as soldiers, etc. Okay, they did that, and including, right, part of that repartimiento system, so-called public works, was mining and working the silver and gold mines. And ironically, the Spaniards had done the same thing when the Romans conquered them. So I find those to be two ironies. And they both offered the same rare opportunities of advancement. And that is namely the church and the military. And of course, you always had a few other exceptions. You had basically, thank you for getting me out notes, gracias al sacar notes. If you engaged in some type of meritorious act, you could rise and be treated as if you were a Spaniard. So that was an option. That was a third option. And of course, you could try to marry up what was called later a pigmentocracy, a social and political and economic hierarchy based upon the pigment of your skin. The lighter and more Spanish you were, the better. Okay. And then number three is pretty self-explanatory, right? And that is that you have the idea that context, right? Context. Context is the surrounding situations, right? The conditions under which an event happens. You got to always consider the context when you're studying anything in history, right? And so, what do you know? The Spaniards would say, Santiago con nosotros, right? Like St. James with us when they'd go to battle against the Aztec. Well, guess what? They said the same thing when they were fighting the Moors back in Spain, because they found what they believed to have been the grave of St. James, the Apostle James, in Compostela, Spain, and he had become the patron saint of their holy war. All right, they had no fewer than 4 popes give them legal sanction to fight this legal crusade against the Moors. So remember, in 711, Ibn al-Tariq and a Moorish army conquered about 3/4 of modern-day Spain and some parts of modern-day Portugal. And they were not ousted, the last representative, until 1492. So, over 7 centuries. And so at any rate, some people really, it's called the Reconquista, right? The reconquest. And so some people really think this is vital context, right? That it helped them develop this ethos, this way of looking at the world, this ethical system that revolved around a holy war warrior mentality. Okay. And what I say, just you can take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think there's no way that you should disregard the context of the Reconquista when you look into the behavior of the Spanish conquerors when they came to the Americas. For sure. I think there are ties. But, right, it was not some neat, monolithic holy war that lasted 700 years. Of course not, right? And so they had a policy, for instance, that was called convivencia, right? Which, as you could probably put together, vivir is to live and con is with. So it's coexistence. It's living with each other. And so for a long time, they had good coexistence. Yes, they had to pay a non-Muslim tax, and they had a type of tribute that they had to pay. Yes, there were quite a few leaders of the Moor leaders in Cordoba who would only allow Spanish Catholics to go so far up their bureaucracy. Okay, but there certainly in many of these administrations and many of these years, there certainly wasn't a holy war constantly going on. In fact, right, you find evidence. It's kind of funny with El Cid, CID. Okay, and I couldn't even tell you what that means actually. But this man becomes the personification of the Reconquest. Okay, and you had Alfredo the Great as well. But with El Cid, right, this guy had fought with Muslim leaders against other Spanish Catholics prior to his famous fight in Valencia. And it was namely, a political thing, supposedly, whereby, he said, I'm not giving Valencia up. And then and only then did he fight Muslim Moor soldiers and win. So he becomes this voice of Cid, right, of the Reconquista, of the holy war against the Moor Muslims. But when you look deeper into his biography, it doesn't fit. It's a distortion, a convenient distortion, right, to have this nice narrative of this holy war. So at any rate, to me, right, it lasted so long. And remember also, right, Spain was split into many Spains, all the way up through Isabel and Ferdinand. You had, Catalonia, Navarre, Aragon, right, Leon. And so all these different provinces had their own kings and their own deals that they cut with the different Muslim leaders. So at any rate, however, do I subjectively state in this number that that this holy war ethos that they developed back in Spain carried itself over into the Americas? Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, and so and look at that, right? That was a direct quote right here versus los extranjeros, right? And as you probably know, extranjero is foreigner. So they were calling them foreigners in the 1400s after the Muslim Moors had been ruling over most of their country for 7 centuries. So they knew how to put that fire in there, right? Let's see here. If I mentioned what they did. And then I tried to show some examples of religious fanaticism and religion as tied to violence. So what I did, right, is first of all, Alexander VI, he himself was a Spaniard, and he gives these edicts out from the city of Tordesillas in Portugal, and basically says, right, that he is granting the Americas, okay, to Spain and Portugal, provided that they make Catholic Christians of the natives. All right. And so at any rate, with that supposed grant, right, is Alexander VI, it was known in Spain as the patronato, okay, is he gave patronage power to the kings and queens of these countries. So they could decide the manner by which the natives were to be converted. All right. And so what happens at first, right, is with the Spaniards, Ferdinand and Isabella, is they just allow they decentralize the process. They democratize the process. They allow any self-styled conqueror or conquistador who was willing to somehow get the money or borrow the money or use somebody else's money and risk his or her own life to come across the Atlantic Ocean and to try to claim or conquer pagan lands, right? They gave them the latitude to decide how they were going to do that, convert them. So then you get things like the requerimiento, right? And this requirement, they would read the Nicene Creed of the Catholic Church, which goes back to like the days of the Bible being put together in the 300s in Nicaea, Turkey. And they read the Nicene Creed about we believe in one God, God the Father, etc. Right? Sometimes it's still recited at Mass, and that's the Nicene Creed. And then they would tell the natives, you have 24 hours to accept the faith, or we declare holy war on you. All right. So obviously, leaving it privately in the hands of self-styled conquerors may not have been the best of idea if you had good intentions in mind for the manner by which Native Americans could convert. All right. And then, you know what? I'm not sure if this is Tacoma. I would have to go back to my book, but it might just be Acoma without the T. But at this place, right? This was in an area in which the Spaniards were trying to trade. Okay. And the governor of New Mexico, his brother, was killed in an altercation trading with the Native Americans. So, of course, they sent in a punitive expedition. And that, by the way, in the early modern era of the 1500s, was very common amongst the Dutch, English, and Spanish. That was not just a uniquely Spanish phenomenon, but it was the idea, right? If you're in an unknown land and you are outnumbered, you had to use deterrence, right? And remember, deterrence, I think of like President Eisenhower during the Cold War, building up our nuclear arsenal. Is that it's like showing your neighbors, right, that you have a pit bull and you own a gun. It's literally making it's appealing to trying to elicit the fear of those around you and not being willing to mess with you, right? And so at any rate, that's what the Western Europeans, I will kind of collectively put them together in this context, if you don't mind, because I've read the same stuff over and over with the English as well. Is that this feeling, right? Is, hey, they're losing respect for us, and that loss of respect makes us look vulnerable, and it's going to lead to them attacking us. We have to keep them afraid of us, especially because they're superior in number and have us surrounded. We have to keep them afraid, right? And of course, using fear as a deterrent, and especially in the form of some kind of massacre or show of military strength, especially if it's not provoked. You're kind of dealing with semantics again, like the meaning of words. You're kind of flirting with terrorism, some might say, but others, right, would say that is very pragmatic. It's very practical, and it's very true and useful. So at any rate, that's what the Spanish did. Is they said we need to have a punitive raid, and we need to make these natives afraid of us. So they attacked this town, but they were told, right, to mortally wound the natives, but not to finish them off, so that a team of priests could come and give their last rites to them before their souls left their bodies and they died. So that's how serious the Spaniards were about conversion of natives. Even amongst their enemy, they went to great length to try to save their soul. And that type of paternalism, right? That type of ethnocentrism, right? Of putting your own culture, your own mindset as the center and the only determinant of how things are. That was typical in the 1500s. It just really kind of was. All right, so what I want to do, if you don't mind, is I want to go to the next one, because this will be due by the day we meet again. Okay. So with this one, right? You want to talk about cherry picking. I absolutely cherry picked facts about the English in light of Whig history. So remember the Whigs, right? They say that they believe that history is evolving into becoming more and more egalitarian, everyone on equal footing, more and more democratic, where more and more the demos, which in Greek just means the common people, are able to participate in government, and more free, right? And so they believe that England has been at the forefront of this evolution, right? This slow crawl toward greater and greater um, democracy, egalitarianism, and freedom. All right. So I cherry pick. I look and see, okay, what can I find right off the bat, right? So the first thing I find are the Celtic people, right? And you have writings, a couple writings that do lend some support to that thesis. Okay, so for instance, Tacitus. Tacitus was at a loss, supposedly, as for how decentralized and averse to having a single ruler the Celtic people were. And of course, right, he was happy for it because it helped facilitate the Romans' conquest of what they would name Britannia, right, England. But he still was at a loss. He just thought, and he articulates that. Tacitus does, as one of the most famous first century historians, right? Contending, man, we could have had a much better fight on our hands with the Celtic people if they had just been willing to get along and go under the rule of one person. And then, of course, right, their aversion to being taken over. I don't know how strong that is as far as showing the Whig thesis of them being a liberty-loving people, but I did it anyway. So Caractacus, right, he has brought into the infamous triumph, right? Remember with the Roman triumphs, they would take the leaders of those that they had conquered, and they'd make them walk a circle around in Rome as kind of trophies, as living trophies, if you will. And the Roman emperor would decide if he was going to kill them or not, or imprison them, or just let them free. He let Caractacus free, supposedly, because of his courage and his desire for liberty. He said that he'd rather die to go ahead and kill him rather than be under the Romans. And then, of course, Queen Boudica, she put that into effect. Queen Boudica supposedly was on a great winning streak against the Romans, and then things turned. And I don't remember if she or her one of her daughters was violated by a Roman leader of soldiers. And when they had her surrounded, she gave poison to her daughters and took it herself. She literally would prefer death for herself and her daughters to the conquest of the Romans. And then I go forward to I show how Roman Britannia just didn't stick very well. They brought some good things to it, as they did to Spain, as far as legal things, school, architecture, infrastructure. They brought all that, but then they left. Right? They were ordered to leave Britannia to come back and face the different Germanic tribes that were attacking Rome in the early 400s AD. So at any rate, in come the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons. And that's where we get the term Anglo-Saxon, right? Because it was pretty much the Angles and the Saxons that took over the 12 regions of England, the present-day England. And of course, the names are not very original, right? You have Sussex, means the Southern Saxons, Essex, the Eastern Saxons, Wessex, the Western Saxons, etc. Okay. Let's see here. When they took over, however, right, they were deliberately decentralized. Okay. Each tribe under its own king or chief. Each Germanic group of people had its own laws and historic traditions. So they were pretty, arguably libertarian, keeping big government away. Okay. And then, of course, after that, you have the Danes, And with the Danes, right, it almost doesn't matter how autocratic the Danes could be from Denmark, right? These Vikings, because they kept a dual system. They allowed the English there, the Angles and Saxons, and anybody who still had some Celtic and other blood in them. They allowed them to have their own English system of laws and rulers, and the Danes had theirs. So literally, it was a dual legal system. So they were very fortunate for that. That doesn't happen very often for a country that's conquered by somebody else, right? And then, right, and then I try to say, see, you see how the Saxons are. Look at how they were back in their homeland. And their homeland, right, I have it up here, was Germany, Denmark, Schleswig, and Holstein. And they put up a great fight against mighty Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor. And they fought for their freedoms. And they were decentralized too, back in the Germanic countries. Okay. Then the next group to come were the Normans. And basically, all I could say on that one, all I could get my hands on is just that I had to concede that the Normans were quite aristocratic when it came to land ownership. This was 1066. This was the original D-Day, right? And the Normans, that was a misnomer from the word Norseman from Norway. So they were Vikings, Scandinavians, and they had taken over France. I don't remember how many years prior, Western France, and established the region of Normandy in France. So they came from the French coast in 1066 and invaded England, and rather easily made inroads into it. And so they confiscated land from a lot of Anglo-Saxon noblemen. Supposedly, we know that. And so, you're not talking about egalitarianism here under the Norsemen or the Normans. However, right, that's just the economic realm. There's not much evidence that they were autocratic, right, or tyrannical politically. So still, right, you don't see much tyranny in England as you're looking at all this, okay? And in some regions more than others. Scotland and Wales always seem to be able to fight their way against these conquerors. Right, so let's see here. And then with the Saxon kings, right, the Wittens, these supposedly were a big deal. Okay, from Wittenagemot, bodies of noblemen who who are elected and serve not only as advisors, but sometimes governing bodies, giving approval to king's laws. So by the 1300s, you're going to have the first parliament in Portugal, but that same century, you're getting the antecedents to it, to the beginnings of a parliament in England. And of course, that's a big deal, right? Because they're the elected voices of the people. So at any rate, I have other things that you could read. Berger writes, Berg or bourgeoisie, right? That means just the city in the Germanic and in the French languages. They had shires and counties of hundreds, right? People that are organized in villages of 100. And the hundreds, they had their own council as well as their own court system. And yes, they did have a trial by your peers. So that was kind of impressive. Okay, the Wittens, the hundreds. And then, of course, you had the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, right? So Article 20 forbade the king from excessively fining subjects for small offenses. Article 39 declared trial by a jury of peers. Article 40 claimed equality of legal protection under the law for all. Article 40 is huge, whereby the king was prohibited from breaking laws. Hence, the rule of law, not the rule of the crown. Okay. And then I just jump right to the next one. I should have made a separate, I don't even have it as a separate sentence. Wow. I think I was getting tired by then. Anyway, the English Civil War. So King Charles I is going to claim the divine right to rule, and he's going to try to shut down Parliament. And Parliament literally is going to engage in a civil war against him, known as the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. And the Roundheads of Parliament win, and they put King Charles under trial, and he's executed. All right. So to them, right, it's one more example of we're not going to tolerate a tyrannical leader who thinks he's above the law. He's going to cooperate with Parliament, which is the voice of the people, right? So like government by consent. And then the Glorious Revolution. James II was removed from the throne without bloodshed. That's why they called it glorious. And William and Mary, William of Orange, who was a Dutchman actually, and Mary signed, right, their subjection to the rule of law and their cooperation with Parliament as their co-ruler. They had to sign that before they could become the new king and queen. So at any rate, I clearly cherry-picked, right? There's no doubt in my mind, if someone asked me to go back to the same sources and find evidence of a special path of tyranny and inequity, right, that I could probably find it. I could probably make that just the opposite type of pattern. Right. And then number two, this is the same as the number 5 or whatever when we were talking about the rule of the Spanish over the Americas, right? And how it was depicted as inequitable. Remember, inequitable is just like an oligarchy, right? It's very unfair, and it's the few having political, social, and economic domination at the expense of the many. And same thing here, right? In this case, it's the gentrymen, the gentry class from Sussex, England. They come and they could, yeah, sometimes it will and sometimes it won't allow me to put it into a color. At any rate, just keep it like that. But the gentrymen, right? They were deliberately invited because of the first governor, royal governor. His name was William Berkeley. And Mr. Berkeley, right, he asked the second, third, and fourth sons of gentrymen back in England to come and receive very, very generous terms to very fertile land in what was known as the Tidewater coastal region of Virginia, where the soil was the best. And of course, second, third, and fourth sons, right, because of primogenitor. The eldest son got everything from dad back in England. So the second, third, and fourth sons, they'd taste the better life just like the first son, but they weren't getting anything after. So a lot of them took this deal up. All right. Then before you know it, this handpicked Governor Berkeley handpicks amongst them his royal council, right? And then they allow, at the very least, in the year 1619, they allowed the first lower branch known as the Assembly, generically, and specifically known as the House of Burgesses. And I think that's interesting calling it that, right? Because remember, the House of Burgesses implies that it is like the middle class from the cities, right? The bourgeois middle class. But that was not necessarily the case, right? Is in many cases, gentrymen got that position as well. So look at here. Between 1680 and 1775, 2/3 of all councilman seats were occupied by members of only 25 families. In 1724, all 12 sitting councilmen were blood-related gentrymen. Of Virginia's 170 councilmen, 152 were gentry. And look at that, only 2 were not English. And then look at this. As for the majority of immigrants during the late 1600s and early 1700s, over 3/4 of them came as indentured servants, right? Unskilled workers, either through crime, abandonment, or poverty, committed to work from 3 to 7 years for a planter in exchange for a passage to the Americas, food and provisions, acquisition of job skills, and eventual freedom with a chance of land ownership. All those things they got in return were called freedom dues that they were supposed to get when they signed up as indentured servants. Okay. 2/3 of such poor immigrants did not possess any capital, any money to start a business, or work skills to start a business, much less wealth or connections to obtain land. All right. So that is a very, that's a system that is pretty darn inequitable, right? So you had your tobacco barons, right, in Maryland as well as Virginia. And by the way, Virginia is going to develop a horrible reputation for not making good on its promises of freedom dues. So very often, these people were not given their freedom dues. So those who were not, right, and kind of the have-nots, many of them moved to the Western Piedmont, Piedmont. And so those two names, right, symbolized this inequitable setup. The Tidewater, and that was, of course, the gentrymen who ran the show, and the Piedmont, who were almost pitiful and poor and lacking in money, lacking in skills, and lacking in much land. And of course, lacking in much of a political voice. So I end by saying, right, how is this more equitable, more enlightened, more egalitarian, or democratic than Spanish America? All right. And then English Southern greed and racism cemented black slavery. All right. So with this, okay, is I contend, instead of having a false dichotomy of either or, it's both. I subjectively believe it was both. Okay. It was economic expediency and racism, both, that led to slavery. All right. So for instance, I follow the narrative of David Breon Davis in his book called Inhuman Bondage. Really good book. He says, right, first they tried the natives, and for multiple reasons that did not work well. They were trying to have trade treaties with them, and that angered them, even if it was people from other tribes that they were enslaving. They didn't like that. And so it hurt their commercial trades and treaties with them. The natives also were dying in droves due to illnesses and so forth, pathogens from Europe that they had no, white blood cell immunity count to fight off. Then you also have white servants, the indentured servants, right? But the word that David Breon Davis says without saying is expectations. These indentured servants, right? They were told, yes, life will be miserable for the next 3 to 7 years, but after that, it's going to get wonderful. They're going to teach you a trade to get on your feet. They're going to grant you a freehold of land. They're going to grant you a certain amount of time's worth of food. And it's all going to look up from there. There was a guy named George Alsop, and he became like a spokesman for indentured servants, right? And it was like the equivalent, right? I like to think of like, I was in grad school, and I was a custodian, and I was proud of that. But while I was proud to be a custodian and felt like I did it decently, I didn't want to stay there. I expected to be able to teach, at the community college level. And so likewise, right? These white laborers had expectations, which made them, possibly volatile if they didn't get what they wanted. And of course, it comes true with Bacon's Rebellion. In Bacon's Rebellion under Nathaniel Bacon, they began fighting the Doeg tribe in the Piedmont. And they were warned that doing so was tantamount to treason because the governor had established a lucrative trade system with the Doeg tribe, and this was cutting in on that money. Well, they fought anyway, and they knew that treason warrants death, right? So after they fought, instead of disbanding, they said, let's just go all the way to the East Coast, to Richmond, Virginia, and let's take on the militia. And so they did, and they won, and they declared a People's Republic of Virginia. And they said it was going to be radical. There was going to be land redistribution, etc. Right? But Nathaniel Bacon gets dysentery and he dies. And the movement just flops. Okay? But you think that didn't scare the gentrymen? So they come up, right, with a conclusion, as I haven't read up above it, is that the white indentured servants and ex-indentured servants who never received their freedom dues have become an unreliable source. And what do you know? This was 1676. And right around the 1660s, they experienced a, quote, it's so terrible to say this word, but a glut in slaves in the Caribbean. A much higher supply of slaves than there was demand to buy them. So even though these are human beings, right, as you know, sadly, a commodity on the market, their price went down. Now they became affordable for a lot more people. So at any rate, I have it here somewhere. But they contended, right, that purchasing an indentured servant who was unreliable, had expectations, didn't expect to stay there from only 3 to 7 years, had become 3/4 of the price of a slave. So if you just extend and are willing to pay a quarter more of that amount for an indentured servant, you could have a slave for life. And then if you bought a woman, you have the woman's children and her daughter's children and so forth. So I hate to say it, but it became a deal. And what had happened, right, is you had the Asante fall, and you had other tribes rise in Africa. And both the rise and fall of different empires in one way or another brought about a higher number of prisoners of war that were brought to Elmina and Luanda, the main slave depots on the Ivory Coast. All right. And then also, as you see up higher, they contended that, hey, slaves won't have expectations. As they come in their chains and coffers, they're going to feel like the world's over already. They're going to tend to be more docile and do as they're told. They also developed through the Spanish a reputation for hardiness, that they didn't die from malaria and other tropical diseases like the natives were. But was racism there to help justify it? Absolutely. And I have evidence of that. I start with Aristotle. Right. Then you go to the Middle Ages. Ibn Khaldun, Gomez Inez de Gerara. I don't know Portuguese, so I probably butchered that. A guy named Leo Africanus. That was the moniker that he was given. If you look these guys up, they write some terrible stuff about African people as travelers. And this guy right here, right? He's younger than I am, and he's very famous for writing histories of racism in the U.S. Ibram Kendi. Right. Look at this. John Pori translated their work, right? Translated their work so that the people in Virginia could read it. So it's not just as if, right, these racist beliefs just organically came along with the Europeans, right? You had people like John Pori who actually deliberately fomented it, right? And when I say foment, right, I mean like a fire, right? When it's just in embers and you feed it oxygen, that's what I mean with that, right? They fomented it, they exacerbated, they made it worse, they deliberately made it grow. Hugh Davis was publicly whipped for lying with a black woman. Anthony Johnson, known in the court cases as Antonio the Negro, he had his land confiscated from him in Virginia because they didn't think it was proper for a man of his color to own land. John Punch was one of 3 runaway servants, indentured servants. The other 2 had what was left of their indenture doubled as punishment, and he was given life simply because he was black and they were white. So anyway, you guys can look further into it, okay? Sorry. And then lastly, right? I could have done, I could have chosen 3, okay, up in the north, 3 different colonies to claim American exceptionalism. And to be honest, if I put the best foot forward on the English colonies or on the Americas, I would not have chosen personally New England. I would have chosen Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had religious toleration. They gave out land for free to the poor. Not always. They had almshouses for those without a place to stay and without any jobs, kind of like gospel mission places now. All this under William Penn. They had good relations with the natives and had annual meetings with them. But I don't know why. For whatever reason, I chose the Puritans. And so with the Puritans, they contend, right, that they were democratic, if you take a look, that they were big on education, all right? They were big on religious freedom, which is a little bit ironic if you read the whole thing, all right? However, in this same section, I challenge that idea of exceptionalism, of being special and different and better. I show a very intolerant side to them when it came to dissent within the community, a very exclusivist side to them when it came to trying to become a church member and citizen, and a very unchristian side to them and how they dealt with Native Americans. All right. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an English comparison with the Spanish. Does anybody have any questions? You guys feel okay on this?
I would, I would say so.
I'm sorry, what's that, Luis?
I said I would say so.
Okay, good, good, good. All right, ladies, you okay? Sorry, Jess. I take it that you tried to say something. I didn't hear anything, but thank you for unmuting. All right, so if you guys don't have any other questions, okay, I was probably going to let you go. This is kind of typical. Where often I'll go about an hour. All right. So thank you. Thank you, Jess. I'm glad to have you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Luis. Good luck.
Thank you.
You too. Have a good evening.